Kingscreek is a horror podcast, and thus the content in this episode may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
You are now entering Kingscreek. Episode 2, Echo's Blessing.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the pod. I'm your host, Damien Bachman, and today we've got something a little less straightforward. Last time I just read one of my uncle's journal entries, but this time this file has got a bunch of different pieces. There's a lawsuit filing which includes a witness statement, a coroner's report, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'm just going to try to read the good stuff here as best I can. I do a lot of work for you guys. Reading documents aloud to a microphone is hard work. Anyway, all of these are filed under the label Case C34, Paranormal Ingestion Blockage. These titles just keep getting better. This is a civil suit for the case of Meyer v. Crimson Apothecaries, and the complaint reads as follows. January 14th, 1984. To whom it may concern. I am contacting you on behalf of my client, the family of one Margaret Peggy Meyer. They allege that you and your product are responsible for the untimely demise of Miss Meyer and are suing for customer endangerment, wrongful death, and emotional damages. Attached is an account from Jonathan Meyer, Margaret's father, of the weeks before her demise, as well as testimonials from others close to the situation corroborating the story, detailed descriptions of your business, and the coroner's report following Miss Meyer's autopsy. The standard rate for a wrongful death settlement of this nature is anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, but my clients are willing to accept a settlement of $200,000 on the condition that you pay their medical debts and close your business for good. If you do not accept these terms, I will be taking you to court. Contact me at the number at the bottom of this letter if you have any inquiries. I'll be in touch. Sincerely, Marvin Hickman, Esquire, Attorney at Law. Lawyers, am I right? And here is the account of Jonathan Meyer. I want to start by saying that I am not a vengeful man. I've always said that holding grudges tears apart lives, and that if everyone sought revenge on everyone who had ever wronged them, our society would collapse. Forgiveness is the glue that we use to hold together relationships. But if what I believe is true, if who I think is responsible for my daughter's death is responsible, then no force on this earth can stop me from seeking my revenge. Every year, my daughter's high school puts on a holiday pageant for the elementary school across the way. It's a cute tradition that brings the community together. Peggy was never the most social butterfly out there, but whenever her older siblings participated in the pageant, they always came out with at least a few more friends. Theater seems to be one of the best extracurriculars for forming friendships, so when auditions rolled around in October, I encouraged Peggy to try out. I figured that, at worst, she'd be an extra or a background character, and even then she could still make friends. I had no idea what was coming. Turns out, Peggy was something of an acting prodigy. Or at least she went to auditions expecting a minor role at best and came away with a lead. Mary, I think. Or Mrs. Claus, I couldn't quite tell the plot. Either way, I was incredibly proud of her and told her as much. I told her that she would be the face of the show, of the school, of our family, and that I had the confidence that she would live up to it. She didn't seem super enthused by the idea, but at the time, I just attributed it to nerves. Her mother, my wife, Violet, was less enthusiastic. She told me later that she had heard bad things about the theater department from our older children. Something about how it puts girls under a lot of pressure. But I figured it was a good enough opportunity that it was worth the risk. I don't think I'd say the same now. Peggy started acting off after that. Not in any kind of paranormal way or anything, but more just distant. She had always been a voracious eater before, but after a few practices for the pageant, she started eating less and less. She would spend hours in the bathroom in the morning before school, primping and preening at a level she never had before. And she seemed to wear a lot of makeup, something I hadn't ever seen her do. I was starting to worry about her, but I also knew that young women go through phases about their image. My wife said as much, and I had seen it in my other daughter. So, I tried not to pry. Still, Peggy concerned me, and I decided to make it a point to assure her that she could talk to me if anything was bothering her. After I told her this, we sat in silence for a moment. She seemed nervous. She opened her mouth a few times as if to say something, but no words came out. Finally, she told me that she had been hoping I could help her with something. She said that she was having trouble fitting the part for the pageant, but that she had found someone who could help her. She just needed to borrow $50. She assured me that she would pay me back as soon as she could. She just needed this desperately. I wasn't quite sure what to make of this. I didn't understand how $50 would help her in the pageant, but she seemed so earnest that I couldn't refuse. You have to understand, she was my daughter. I would have done anything for her. I still will. The following evening, she handed me a handwritten note. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a receipt from a seller by the name of Crimson Apothecaries for a product called Echo's Blessing. I asked Peggy what it was, and she just gave me a knowing smile. Something to help me fit, she said. I should have pressed her further, but I didn't. I was so stupid. After that day, Peggy seemed to brighten up slightly. She was still spending hours in front of the mirror every morning, but she started eating again. In fact, she started eating a lot, almost obsessively. As the days started to stretch on further, it seemed like she was eating more and more, much more than she ever did before. Once, while she was piling on her third helping of chicken and pasta, one of her brothers joked that she was going to get fat. The look she gave him made his face go white, and it scared even me. It was angry, but what's more, it was desperate. Then the moment passed, and we continued eating like nothing happened. Peggy eventually stopped gorging herself on food, but her behavior became odd in other ways. She became distant, irritable, and slow. She would sleep all the time, barely making time for school and the pageant. She seemed to always be shivering, and she would be wearing more and more makeup. And strangest of all, she seemed to pile herself in layers and layers of clothing. 3 sweaters became standard for her. She stopped coming to meals. I would rarely ever see her, and when I did, she acted erratic and paranoid. She was always deathly pale, and her face seemed thinner and thinner. It got to the point that the sight of her would startle me and other family members because she just looked so sickly. Still, she insisted that she was fine. I don't think any of us believed her, but we weren't sure. It wasn't long before something terrible happened. One day in mid-December, just a week or two before the pageant, Peggy was at practice. Apparently, she was participating in a fairly routine dance recital when she collapsed. I don't know if she fainted or if her muscles gave out or if she just fell, but she did not get back up. I received a call from the school that she had been taken to the hospital. Their standard procedure was to simply keep students in the nurse's office, but when they saw her arms, they decided it was an emergency. I called out of work as soon as I could and went to see my daughter. When I got there, I couldn't suppress my gasp of terror. It was the first time I had seen her without her 3 layers of sweaters, and I now saw why she wore them. She was like a skeleton, she was so thin. bones jutting out, pressing against the skin. Her hair was in matted clumps, and she was so weak that she could barely keep her eyes open. Her doctors took me aside and told me that she was suffering from extreme malnutrition. They asked me if she had any kind of pre-existing conditions, if my family had a history of diabetes, and if there was any chance that she was allergic to anything. I told them no to all of that and simply said I had seen her eating fairly regularly until a couple of weeks before. At this, the doctors gave each other a look. I asked what was wrong. One doctor, a woman in her 40s, sat in front of me and looked me in the eye. She told me that the only medical explanation for Peggy's condition was that she had been starving without food for at least a month. Moreover, she wasn't taking to any of the usual emergency treatments. Normally, if someone was brought in with this level of malnutrition, they would try to infuse nutrients manually through feeding tubes or even just injecting it right into their bloodstreams. But with Peggy, they couldn't seem to get it to work. My daughter was starving to death, and they could do nothing. It wasn't long before she was gone. I felt every torturous minute of waiting crawl by, but she was a few days away from it even before we rushed her to the hospital. After the pronouncement, I took a taxi home. I stumbled through the front door of my house, exhausted from days without sleep. As I took off my jacket, a piece of paper fell out of one of the pockets. I picked it up and recognized it as the receipt Peggy had given me. For Echo's blessing from the cellar, Crimson Apothecaries. Almost exactly around the time this trouble started. I know that I'm being reckless. I know that I might be jumping to conclusions. Heck, I've not even gotten a full 8 hours of sleep in the last 2 weeks. But something happened to my daughter that wasn't normal. If Crimson Apothecaries did something, sold something to Peggy that changed her, then they deserve to have the book thrown at them. And that's what I'm paying for. So that the one thing she won't be starved of is justice. End of account. That was... Yeah. All of the testimonials in this file pretty much say the same thing, though none are as in-depth. Looking more into the aftermath, it's hard to say whether or not Mr. Meyer actually got his justice. There's the lawsuit filing, but there's no record of whether or not a settlement was reached or if they went to court. Apparently, it was pretty hard to locate Crimson Apothecaries, and it's unclear whether there was an actual brick-and-mortar store anywhere in town. There was a record that the pageant still happened, despite losing the leading actress so close to the performance. There's an old program included here that lists an understudy taking over Peggy's role. Seems a bit in bad taste, if you ask me. Uncle Mark didn't have a lot of follow-up notes for this one. The only thing that seems to be his own addition is the underlining of the name Crimson Apothecaries in red pen. Maybe this business was something he was looking into? Hard to tell. I'll have to go through his other files to see what's there. One last thing. Margaret Meyer was pronounced dead on December 19th, 1983. The cause of death was listed as the flu, though it says her weakened condition caused complications. The autopsy report is very in-depth, much more than I was expecting. There isn't a lot to note there out of the ordinary, except for the contents of her digestive system. Her stomach, believe it or not, was full. It was stuffed even with food. All of it had been chewed, obviously, but that disguised the fact that, despite being sometimes weeks old, absolutely none of it had been digested. This is Damien Bachman, signing off.
Today's episode of Kingscreek was written and performed by Thomas S. Dennis. It was produced by James Makepeace, and the score was composed by Kai After Kai. Script supervision is provided by James Makepeace and Ryan Kennedy. Our cover art is by Cybergrape UK, and our social media manager is Ryan Kennedy. All episodes are a production of Tracer Magnum Entertainment. If you'd like to support the show, rate and review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Chatbox, or whatever service you use to listen to our show. It helps tremendously and ensures we're seen by more and more of the unsuspecting public. If you'd like to get in touch with us or become involved with the community, join our Discord server or follow us on Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and Tumblr, all under the handle @KingscreekOfficial. Share with your friends, family, or anyone else you want to ensnare in our web. And above all else, thank you for listening.